can't hear a word with that. I honestly can't hear. What did you say?
Do you want to make your statement before we move on?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Development Committee. I can't hear a word with that. I beg your pardon. I'm pleased to say that we've been trying for a year, but of course the pandemic stepped in to invite Paul to chair one of the committee meetings, and hopefully on more than this one occasion gives me a break as well, and it also gives Paul a chance to practice his technique. So I hand over to Paul, and I hope we have a really good meeting.
Thank you, Pauline. So it's likely to be easier than trying to chair a meeting of head teachers. So, previous experience sitting in the front of a meeting like this. Anyway, before we begin, a reminder that those who haven't attended previously, members that make up the committee are those seated in the centre. Public speakers will speak from the chair over there. There is a microphone. And we have 3 officers present. That's 4. That's still driving the technology. So could I ask officers to introduce themselves, please?
Good morning. My name is Jamie Smith. I'm a Senior Planning Officer.
Good morning. I'm Jane Owen, Senior Planning Officer.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the public. My name is Philip Rosen. I'm the Assistant Director of Planning here at North Norfolk.
Morning, everyone. My name is Noel Doran. I'm a solicitor and legal advisor to the Development Committee this morning. Thank you.
Morning, all. I'm Matthew Stemovich, Democratic Services.
Linda Yarham, Democratic Services.
And before we move on further, I'd like to welcome Dr. Holliday as a new member for Coastal. And welcome to the committee. I'm sure there'll be some interesting topics coming up. A little bit of housekeeping as usual. Please make sure your mobiles are off or on silent. Enough noise from the Air Force out there. So further interruptions. No fire alarms are planned. If the alarms go, we'll follow the officers to the places of safety. Not expected. Would members of the public not speak to committee members during the meeting, or if we take a coffee break, which I would not expect this morning, but who knows? So we move to formal item 2 on the agenda. Apologies for absence and details of any substitutes. I have been informed of only one, that is Councillor Stockton, with Councillor Toy substituting.
And also, Mr. Chairman, I have an apology from Councillor Varley, but no substitute.
Thank you. Item 3, I've not been notified of any items of urgent business.
No items, Chairman.
Thank you. The order of business will be as stated on the agenda. So to 5, do any members have declarations of interest to make in accordance with the flow chart attached to your agendas? Thank you. Okay, we move to the meat of the meeting then. Item 6 on your agenda, High Kelling PF/20/1904, demolition of existing TB annex and erection of replacement 1.5-storey dwelling and cart shed at land south of Brackenwood, Cromer Road, High Kelling. Mr. Forster. I just remind you, if you've read the papers, sorry, which I'm sure you all have, that this is a slightly odd application in that there is a pre-existing permission for a bungalow dating back to the 1960s on this site. Therefore, we're focusing on the nature of the building proposed, not the principle of the development of the site. That's already been established in law. So if I can pass over to Officer Smith to present, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'm presenting item 6 on the agenda, which is application PF 2019-04 on pages 3 to 10 of your agenda pack and including your presentation slides. As already stated, the application seeks permission to erect a 4-bedroom detached replacement dwelling with detached 2-bay cart shed. The scheme provides parking and manoeuvring and a minimum of 3 cars, residential amenity space and bin storage. The site is located in High Kelling and is set back from the main Cromer Road, located within a secluded setting surrounded by mature screening. Amended plans have been received as part of the application, which reduces the height of the proposed dwelling from a 2-storey dwelling to a 1.5-storey dwelling, including further reductions in its overall size and scale. As already stated, there is a turning to the principal development. This was established with the issue of a certificate of lawfulness through planning reference number EF/14/0993 in 2014. The certificate of lawful development acknowledged that a planning permission was implemented and approved in the 1960s. Therefore, the site has an extant permission for the erection of a 3-bedroom, 1.5-storey dwelling located to the east of the site. As such, members should note the fallback position in that a dwelling could be built as approved, which has been given weight in this officer recommendation. The floor plans, design and external appearance of the approved dwelling is noted on slides 4 and 5 of the presentation. In terms of the site itself, the certificate of lawful development highlighted that the principle of a replacement dwelling only applied to the eastern half of the current application site. The western half of the application site was not included within the certificate of lawful development and falls within the countryside policy area as set out within the core strategy policies SS1 and SS2. Policy SS2 does not allow for new dwellings in the countryside except in exceptional circumstances. Officers have had regard to the extant certificate of lawful decision, sustainability credentials highlighted in a High Kelling appeal case, and that the site would only provide 1 dwelling. It is officer opinion that centralising the proposed dwelling within this site would not be uncharacteristic of other dwellings in the immediate context, which are situated within large spacious plots with mature gardens. With the combination of the above, if permission was granted, the site would only permit 1 dwelling and can be conditioned accordingly. In terms of the wider application merits, members will have reviewed the report and accompanying slides, so I'll not go through these in detail, but would be happy to answer questions later. I will, however, discuss the following main issues arising from the application. Firstly, whether the proposed development is accepted in principle. The principle of development has already been referred to above and discussed in detail on pages 6 and 7 of your officer report. In terms of policy H08 of the adopted core strategy, which considers whether replacement dwellings in the countryside should not result in a disproportionately large increase in the height or scale of the original dwelling, or would not materially increase the impact of the dwelling on the appearance of the surrounding landscape or countryside. The application received no objections from either the landscape officer or the Norfolk Coast Partnership in terms of landscape impact. The scheme has been amended and reduced in height from 8.2 metres to 6.6 metres, resulting in now a 1.5-storey dwelling. Additionally, the overall floor area has been reduced by 25% from 200 square metres to 150 square metres. And the extant approval, which is able to be constructed as now, which includes permitted development rights, would equate to approximately 126 square metres. Given the amended plans received, the secluded nature of the site with mature boundary screening set back from the roadside, officers consider the scheme as amended acceptable in this regard. Turning to residential amenity and the impacts on nearby dwellings, representations have been received regarding overlooking and loss of privacy to neighbouring dwellings. The site is well screened, as demonstrated within the presentation slides, and there is approximately 56 metres between the proposed dwelling and the dwelling to the north, and approximately 31 metres between the proposed dwelling and the dwelling to the west. Officers consider this relationship to be acceptable and would not result in significant impacts of overlooking, overbearing or overshadowing. Officers consider the scheme as acceptable with regards to impacts from residential amenity. In terms of highway safety, representations have been received regarding road safety at the junction of the site with the A148. The highways officer was consulted and did not raise an objection to the application, given that 1 dwelling has already been granted at the site. Officers consider the scheme to be acceptable with regards to highway safety. In terms of effects on biodiversity, Representation has been received regarding the impact upon protected species, bats, due to the loss of the TB building. As part of the application process, the local planning authority must consider whether the licence is likely to be granted by Natural England, who is a responsible body, in order to deviate from protection afforded by the habitats regulations. The Council's Landscape Officer has reviewed the ecologist report submitted with the application and considers that whilst there will be damage, there will be mitigation to replace what is lost by the provision of a new bat roost in surrounding facilities, including further site enhancement and therefore no impact on the local bat population. Based on the evidence provided within the application, the Landscape Officer considered that Natural England licence would be forthcoming subject to the provision of mitigation and compensation measures. To conclude, Officer recommendation is one of conditional approval as detailed on page 9 of the report. And thank you, Chair. I conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Officer Smith. Nice, clear presentation. That gives us all the information we need to work on. Thank you. We now move to public speakers. Do we have a town or parish council representative to speak?
No, we have no town or parish council.
Therefore, we move to speakers opposing the application. We have one, Professor Hoxley. If you'd like to, well, no, you'll have 3 minutes, and Linda will be timing it assiduously as always.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me speak this morning. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my wife. We purchased Brackenwood 6 years ago in the knowledge that lapse permission had been granted for this via the certificate of lawfulness for the 3-bedroom chalet bungalow. The current application is for a much larger house, and I would take issue with you as that it's now 1.5 stories. I still believe it's 2 stories. If you look at the plans, the first floor accommodation is the same size as the ground floor accommodation, therefore it's not 1.5 stories. The current application is for a much larger house which will tower over us, the other bungalow and the church, which are all adjacent to the application site. This is the 4th attempt to increase the size of dwelling since the certificate of lawfulness was approved. The previous applications in 16, 18 and 19 were refused. Although the applicants have made some attempts to reduce the size of the dwelling, it's still substantially larger than the 1960s dwelling. It's got 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms and a study. It's a large family house, as opposed to the original house, which would have been suitable for a retired couple. This is going to lead to overuse of the driveway, which we own. The chalet bungalow, for which permission currently exists, could be built in a traditional way. This larger dwelling will require much more off-site prefabrication and would require large lorries to take it down to the site, which is, the driveway is 75 metres long. I've no idea how they'll navigate this driveway, which is 3 metres wide as its narrowest. The main road is very much busier than it was in the 1960s. In our view, the development for a much larger house will present a traffic hazard, given that the access driveway is adjacent to the church access driveway and opposite Avenue Road. This issue of access to the busy A148 from Bale Road, just west of the application site, was the subject of a recent planning appeal, which was refused. This latter hazard will be exaggerated should the property be used for holiday letting, which is our main concern. And if you can't stop them using this as holiday letting, I ask that you please refuse the application. Our neighbours at Tall Pines have told us that they've objected to this application and have shown us the email acknowledgement of their objection. However, the objection does not appear on the website, and in order to avoid a possible issue of maladministration, we recommend that we ask that this missing objection be investigated. In conclusion, we request that the committee refuse the application as it's still contrary to policies EN 4, H08 and Article 8, in the opinion of the Parish Council and all the neighbouring property owners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hoxley. We now move to supporting speaker, Mr. Forster.
proposals call for the construction of a 1.5-storey 4-bedroom family home, which will be my home. My grandfather owned the land and my father owned the land. It's been our building company's yard for the last 50 years. We strongly believe that the proposals put forward will greatly improve the site aesthetically, with only a single dwelling to be created for ourselves, and do not represent excessive overdevelopment of the area, specifically as planning permission for a dwelling had already been attained. The proposals have been redesigned and amended closely in cooperation with Jamie Smith, the planning officer, with no less than 3 major rounds of amendments to the proposals put forward during the applications run over the last 6 months. All of these amendments were guided by Jamie's and by extension the council's recommendations to alter the designs in favour of gaining the planning permission, as well as abiding by the council's design strategies and development guidelines. We have greatly appreciated the council's input during the application process, and all of the recommendations have been taken on board and incorporated wholly into the designs as they now stand. The design has been reduced greatly in overall footprint, height and massing from those originally submitted, bringing the proposed dwelling in line with that which has been deemed acceptable by Jamie. She has relayed back to us all of the outstanding issues regarding the original proposals. They've now been adequately satisfied within the current design and associated information provided. Thanks to the site's location and existing natural screening in the form of large mature trees to the boundaries, the proposal will adequately be visually shielded from all the neighbouring properties. The long driveway from Cromer Road ensures that the dwelling will be very much set back from the roadside and will have 0 to no visual impact upon the current street scene of Cromer Road. There'll be very little increase in traffic along this driveway, with the proposed dwelling when compared to that historically, with, if anything, a reduction in the amount of traffic. In conclusion, due to the high levels of input regarding the design of the proposals received from the planning officer attached to the application, their own recommendations that the planning application be drafted for approval, we will be hopeful that this committee will look favourably upon the application and that approval will be granted here today, and it won't be used for letting. It's a family home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forster. Okay, now come to the local member, Councillor Perry Warnes.
Thank you, Chair. The original certificate of lawfulness that this planning application seeks to replace was for a significantly smaller property. Repeated attempts have been made to gain permission for a larger house, which would have a far greater impact on neighbours, as we've heard from Mr. and Mrs. Hoxley. Those applications have sensibly been refused. As High Kelling Parish Council pointed out in their objection, the proposed house is top-heavy and would overlook neighbouring properties. This surely contravenes policy EN4 of the adopted core strategy. The increase in size of the footprint granted by the certificate of lawfulness surely contravenes policy H08. In addition, the increased traffic from a larger property accessing a busy road via a difficult junction should raise more alarm with the Highways Department than they report. It certainly caused concern to High Kelling Parish Council, who are familiar with the A148 Cromer Road. And I am concerned that the Landscape Officer's report refers to the presence of bats, recommending a mitigation and enhancement scheme. In Britain, all bat species and their roosts are legally protected. Indeed, the June newsletter of the Norfolk Constabulary Operation Randall draws our attention to this. I would argue that this application therefore contravenes policy EN9 of the adopted core strategy, as well as section 15 of the National Planning Policy Framework. I would also argue that it contravenes the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations of 2017 and the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. Perhaps with the proposed mitigation measures, the resident bat population would not in itself constitute grounds for refusal. But I believe that in conjunction with the other problems associated with this application, It firmly tips the balance. The objections you have heard are not a case of NIMBYism. There is a realistic concern that the shared used driveway would be used much more by the inhabitants of the proposed 4-bedroom family home than the inhabitants of the chalet bungalow for which permission exists. This would have a substantial impact on neighbours. There is also a realistic concern that the construction traffic for the proposed larger build would have difficulty navigating the narrow shared driveway with associated nuisance and hazard. Mr. and Mrs. Hoxley do not object to a house being built there. They object to a house of this size being built here, as do many others, and I agree with them. I ask you to, once again, refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Warnes. Just a question, if I may, to Officer Smith before we move to debate. Mention's been made of a missing objection on the public documentation. Either could I yourself or Mr. Rouse?
No, I can confirm that there's 2 objections that I've recorded in my officer report. Why that's not in the public domain on the outside and sort of public access, I can't explain. But I've recorded 2 objections, both of the people who have made representations. So they have been acknowledged in the officer report, and I've read them both as part of the application process.
Thank you, Officer Arson.
To confirm for you, Chairman, that the details of those letters are contained for all members in the report today, as our officer has suggested. Excuse me, Angie, would you mind turning your mic off? We'll stay where we are. So,
Is that better? Okay, thank you.
So just to confirm, members, the details of those objections are contained in your report. The issue is one of making sure that the decision makers today have got those full details in front of them. It is regretful that the letter of objection is not on the public access system, and I will follow up that issue with our administration team after this meeting. I do not find that prejudices the decision making today, and I find that you do have the full information in front of you from both objectors. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, members, debate. Yes, Councillor Grocher.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure why the old TB building has to be demolished, which is the Bat Roost Haven, because with discussions prior to this meeting, it is quite a substantial brick building. It seems a shame to demolish it and then have to provide a new bat roost elsewhere. Jamie, do you know why?
Yeah, thank you. It's to do with the sort of the collective impact of buildings and structures on the site, and what would appear to be sort of overdevelopment of lots of buildings and structures on there. So historically, through the previous planning applications, previous officers dealt with, this application came forward with removal of all the buildings and obviously having the application dwelling and the cart shed. So that was what was put in front of us. And obviously the landscape officer has reviewed the application and considered that mitigation in terms of new bat roosts would overcome that impact of them relocating the bats.
But there is a problem, isn't there? Because you do have to get permission.
We do. We often see license applications, and we often see this coming forward as a planning authority. What the landscape officer will look at is there's tests to be made in terms of assessing the impacts of protected species. And in this instance, if there was unmitigated impact, that would result in a minor negative impact. But because there is a mitigation enhancement measures, they consider it to be a license to be granted by Natural England, because they can offer a bat roost elsewhere in the site.
Sorry, but where? I mean,
It will be subject to planning conditions. So they would have to, this application, if permitted, would be subject to quite detailed planning conditions on many aspects. One being arboricultural, to do with trees, and also protected species. So it's not just the mitigation license required; it's also further details to be submitted by the ecologist.
Any other member? Councillor Fitchton.
Yeah, if it would help, the officer did comment in her report that a licence from Natural England is being applied for, and they anticipate that it will be accepted, which of course Natural England will not allow any disturbance for protected species. So I think we can have confidence in that the proposed new back boxes will mitigate any disturbance through losing that building. That helps.
Thank you. Does that mean you are in support of the application and prepared to propose?
Yes, I am happy to propose it, actually. I think we've obviously gone into very great detail with all the potential problems with this. And I can see absolutely no reason to refuse it, so I'm happy to propose it.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? Yes, Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the height of the building. I just want clarification. Page 6 of the report, it's talking about a reduction in 8.2 down to 6.6 metres in height. Is that from one design that's been submitted to another, or is it from the original 1960 design to that now? Because I think that's, well, to me, it's important anyway.
Thank you. The 1960s plans, obviously in square feet, and they are old plans. The plans, obviously, they are on your presentation slides, and I think they were page 6 and 7.
Yeah, there's no height mentioned on those.
No, there isn't, because we are unable to scale off them anymore. But as you can see, it's a very, very high pitched roof. Probably, I'm guessing about 40% pitch. It's a very high pitched roof. I can assume that would be something around between 6.5 to 7 metres, given the pitch of that roof. Obviously, the reduction in scale of the application proposed in front of us, this is the 3rd or 4th iteration in terms of planning application that's substantially decreased in size and scale of massing since its original submissions in 2018. This instance, they have reduced it from 8.8 metres in height to 6.6, I think what I said, which obviously is an almost a 2 metre reduction in height, which is probably on par with the application dwelling pitch for the 1960s dwelling.
Answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, it does. If I can just make a statement, Chair. So to me, this is finely balanced decision that we're making here today, but I would just like to say in public that I don't see anything that will mitigate climate change within this dwelling. I think it's really important that, I mean, the applicant will know that we've declared a climate emergency at North Norfolk District Council, and reading these papers, I see no measures at all that would introduce, that would mitigate those. And I'm the first to admit these aren't material planning considerations, but in my judgment, they certainly affect my judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Very valid point, actually. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've always got great worries when we're looking at something that seems in places to come out of a very own doomsday book. If you're going back to lawfulness of 1960, as much as I love that generation, nothing that was passed in 1960 bears any resemblance to what is the world today. That worries me. And the fact, secondly, is that there has been several applications in order to get a building passed to put something on this site, and that's taken 60 years. That concerns me, because if we refuse this time, through what I find is the local members' very just objections. What are we going to have? Another application? So they can squeeze it down to get it in? And that concerns me. I understand the presentation from the officer was very thorough, and I've listened to the support and the objecting spokesman. But I think the fact that it's here today for debate, 60 years after the lawfulness was agreed, I think speaks volumes. And at the end of the day, taking the climate change, it is a very valid point. You know, we can't let one go through when we've adopted a policy and declared a climate change. It is a very, very hard decision. And at the moment, as it stands, bearing in mind the local members' objections, I think I'm erring on the side of refusal, but I haven't yet quite made my mind up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Officer Rowson would like to comment.
Just to help members, Chairman, through you, I've been reviewing the design and access statement provided by the applicant, and there are some commitments under our policy EN6. So without further ado, I'll read to you the details. The proposal will utilise a number of features increasing its sustainability. An air source heat pump is intended to be used to provide heat into the property. Energy efficient lighting is to be used throughout the entire property, internally and externally. There is also an opportunity to utilise photovoltaic panels on the roof of the main property. It has an ample facing south roof. It was a southern aspect. So, Chairman, if members have concerns about those issues under policy EN6, then we can ensure that those issues could be secured by the use of a planning condition, which it seems that the applicant may support. Thank you.
Sir Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on from Officer Rowson, actually, I'd called that up as well and read that. And what I would prefer to see was, again, that it says there's the opportunity to use photovoltaic panels, not that they will be used. And also, from what we've been told about the structure of the building, you'd have thought that you know, if it's prefabricated, then we could be looking at a zero carbon property, you know, because they're prefabricated and delivered in. So whilst it's gone some way, yeah, I understand the weight that goes onto the, you know, that this puts to the application, you know, disturbing bats and minimal environmental things does, for me as well, carry some weight in that. So yeah, I need to put that in my consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Halliday.
Familiarity. Looking at the glazing, there seems to be quite an extent of it. And I think that was picked up by landscape. Actually, they mentioned the amount of glazing and the fact that there are roof lights, which are somewhat more intrusive than in terms of distributing light than actual lights in the walls. And I wondered if that could possibly be addressed. And also the use of a metal roof, brick and wood, to me, doesn't feel very comfortable with the rest of the vernacular of High Kelling. And I wondered if that could be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Officer, what further conditions might be appropriate, given a considerable list already?
I think, members, there are details included within the proposals. Those are issues which are part of your consideration today. The concern I have, and I appreciate the points raised by members today, is that there are other issues, for example, the materials, the issue of maybe changing the design to the dwelling, that are actually outside of those proposals as they currently stand. So my suggestion would be, members, that you first of all vote on the proposals as they stand today, and you assess them as they stand under the officer's report. And we make a decision on the application that is on the table today. If, members, you find that to be unacceptable, then further alternatives, working in these new teeth, further opportunities will be available for you through the consideration potentially of a deferral or a refusal of permission after you've considered the substantive motion in front of you. But we need to look at the proposals as they stand today, and we need to consider those and make a decision on them as they stand. As you've heard, that has taken a great deal of time. Many people have been consulted on the application, and there has been serious consideration by the applicant to arrive at what we have today. We need to make a decision on the basis of that and then try to move forward.
Thank you. Come back to you, Nigel. You've already spoken, so Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do share the point that's been raised about the glazing, excuse me, in the property. I think the property is situated quite close to the the dark skies restricted area, which I think is Kelling Heath. I don't think that this design takes into account sufficiently the impact of the open aspects and quite extensive glazing in the design. I have a concern about that. I also think that there is perhaps a lack of detail in the report as to how that aspect is going to be managed. I'm not wholly convinced about the design of this metal profile roof in an area such as Kelling, High Kelling, and for that reason and the impact on the dark skies, I am tending towards proposing a refusal on the basis that the property could be much better designed to comply with its setting. I would like to propose a refusal. I'm quite happy to propose a refusal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Member will be aware we have to vote on the proposal in front of us first.
Yeah, sure.
And it may well be that refusal is the outcome. Councillor Pearce, you've spoken once, if there's a new point, I'll...
Very quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to propose that we go for deferral, refusal and deferral, because another point has just been brought forward. And it, to me, gives grounds to the fact that how the hell can we look at something in the proposed in 1960 and consider it current? So therefore, I would second the proposal for refusal and deferral.
Thank you, Chair. You can either refuse or you can defer. You can't do both. A refusal is a refusal giving rise to a right of appeal. A deferral is putting off the application for further consideration. Just one further point I'd like to add in terms of the legality of the permission. The permission was granted in 1960, but the lawfulness of building out that permission was established in 2014, so 7-8 years ago. So that is the fallback position that is a material consideration when considering the application before you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a proposal then for deferral. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor.
I thought we had to go for the yes, the officer's recommendation before we go for
An application to defer puts off the consideration of the substantive motion, and so it should be taken first. Obviously, if that vote fails, then the substantive motion goes to the vote.
So the motion currently before us is to defer consideration to enable the concerns raised by members to be addressed. Are we clear on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. First, I would like to, if members do vote for deferral, we need to be precise in what we will be negotiating with the applicant around So if you do vote for deferral, I will assume it's on the basis of your debate so far today, but I will require for the purpose of the minutes that we have clarity around the precise areas that you're asking officers to go back and debate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. If I can assist there, I think what's come through to me is there are concerns regarding the environmental standards. There are concerns regarding dark skies. There are concerns regarding the management of the pat roost. Is there anything I've missed there? Thank you. Material, yeah, particularly the nature of the roof. Have I missed anything? Councillor Lloyd.
Chair, can we also consider the accessibility for construction vehicles up the lane as part of that deferment, please?
Chairman, that could be covered by a construction management plan that could be dealt with via a condition, but there's no harm at all in asking for some detail, proposing the details of access to the site at this stage, if members vote to defer the application.
Thank you. Are we done? Vote please, Linda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll read people's names alphabetically. This is for deferral of this application. Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett.
Against.
Councillor Grove-Jones.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
Against.
Councillor Holliday.
For.
Councillor Kershaw.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
For.
Councillor Pearce.
For.
Councillor Toy.
For.
And I understand Councillor Withington is not present. And neither is Councillor Yasimi. That's 9 votes in favour of deferral and 2 against. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. The consideration is therefore deferred pending further consideration of the matters raised. And, no doubt come back before us in due course. Everything further to comment, Sir Ernst?
Just to confirm, Chairman, for members of the public attending, that officers will be in touch with the applicant, and if amendments are made, then of course there will be further consultation on those amendments, but we must also respect that the applicant may have the right to seek a determination of the application by the planning inspector. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we move on to item 7. Trunch PF/20/2005 residential development comprising up to 3 detached single-storey dwellings, including detached garage to plot 3 in behind Itteringham, Chapel Road, Trunch. Officer Owen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you said, this is item 7 in the agenda, reference PF 22005, set out on pages 11 to 17 in the report pack, together with accompanying presentation slides. The proposal is an outline application, including access, to establish in principle whether up to 3 dwellings would be acceptable on this site at land rear of Itteringham, Chapel Road, Trunch. The application is referred to the committee at the request of Councillor Hayman on the grounds that the development site is outside the settlement limit. The main issues for consideration are whether development is acceptable in principle and whether the access arrangement is acceptable. All other matters, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, are reserved for future consideration should outline planning permission be granted. An indicative site plan has been provided to demonstrate potentially how up to 3 dwellings could be accommodated on the site, but should planning permission be granted, the indicative site plan does not form part of this approval. In terms of issues to highlight, the application is a resubmission of an earlier refuse scheme for outline planning permission, with all matters reserved for 4 dwellings. The reasons for refusal are set out in section 1 of the report. The scheme has been reduced from 4 2-storey dwellings to up to 3 single-storey dwellings, and the access has been revised by relocating it from the western side to the eastern side of the site. With regard to the previous reasons for refusal relating to a footpath link, in relation to this application, the Highways Authority have reconsidered this and have deemed it to be impractical. There are therefore no highway safety grounds on which reasons for refusal could now be substantiated. In terms of the principle, the site is within countryside outside of any defined limit. However, the development accords with paragraph 78 of the NPPF in relation to promoting sustainable development in rural locations to enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities, and the site is surrounded by residential development and is therefore not physically separate or remote from a settlement. In addition, Trench has a number of services and facilities, including a village hall and church, convenience store, post office, public houses and social club. There are also a range of businesses in the Trench area. The nearest schools are at North Walsham, approximately 3.5 miles away, and Munsley, 2.3 miles away. Munsley also has a petrol filling station and a number of other services and facilities. Trench is also served by a regular hourly bus service which links to Munsley and local villages, linking North Walsham and Cromer, from where further services to most market towns between Stanton, Fakenham, Norwich and Great Yarmouth can readily be reached. The village is also served by a number of quiet lanes which are suitable for cycling and walking. In summary, despite the departure from policy SS2, it is considered the principle of development on its own merits is acceptable and would support the rural community of Trench. I would also draw attention to the previous applications the council has approved in Trench in recent years, where the principle of development has been accepted and which are detailed on page 15 of the report and plotted on a map as part of the presentation slides. The indicative layout demonstrates that the site is capable of accommodating up to 3 dwellings, which, although backland development would be in keeping with the settlement pattern in the area, and the scale and massing of the dwellings themselves would be in keeping with other properties in the surrounding area. Each property would have a private amenity area, which, as indicated, would accord with the requirements of the North Norfolk Design Guide, which requires amenity provision to equate to that of the footprint of the dwelling. One of the other issues of concern is landscaping of the site, which is discussed in detail in section 3 of the report. However, landscaping as a reserved matter, and whilst there are trees on the boundaries of the site, which have amenity value and are important to the landscape and should be retained and protected during development, this is not a matter for consideration as part of this application. Similarly, no details have been provided or are required at this stage in terms of mitigation planting for any trees which have or would be lost to facilitate any development. However, should the development of this site be agreed in principle, full details would be required and assessed as part of a separate application, as part of a reserved matters application, which would include a full arboricultural impact assessment and method statement, including details of how the site can be developed without damage to the trees, together with details in relation to the appearance, layout and scale of the dwellings. So that concludes the issues I wanted to particularly emphasise. The recommendation is approval subject to the conditions set out on pages 18 and 19 of the report. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer. Okay, we have no parish rep that I'm aware of. I have no opposing speaker that I'm aware of. The applicant is not present, but has submitted a very late email received, as you can see, yesterday evening, almost after close of play. It's on your table in front of you. Like a couple of minutes just to read through it, Move on. Okay, if you're happy to proceed. We do not have the local member present, so debate. Councillor Lloyd and Councillor Grove-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, and the microphone. I've just got some real concerns about the work that took place on this site before this application. The landscape officers suggesting that a number of trees were felled, and this report is actually talking about the trees that remain. It seems to me that we're in danger here of rewarding people for arbitrarily chopping down trees in the district to that profit, if you like, and that weighs heavily on me. The fact that the trees weren't subject to tree preservation order, well, they wouldn't have been, because he didn't seek permission in the first place, as far as I can tell from the way this report is written. I'm happy to be corrected on that. So for me, I'm uneasy about this application, but I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Oh, Sir Owen, could we have any further comment on the tree situation you're aware of?
I think the only comment I would make is no, permission wasn't sought to fell any of the trees. However, no consent would have been required if they weren't subject to a tree protection order. So essentially it is regrettable, but they wouldn't have been required to submit any form of application to us.
Thank you, Councillor Doran.
Just for the benefit of members, unless a tree is within a conservation area or subject to a tree preservation order, consent is not necessary for it to be felled. In order to instigate a tree preservation order, local authority has the power to do that itself. It doesn't require independent application, although often it is as a result of local representation that a local authority will go through the process of imposing a tree preservation order outside a conservation area or within a conservation area. So some assistance.
Thank you. Councillor Grove-Jones.
I just wanted to say that as over the years I've sat on this committee, I do not like the fact that if a member asks for an application to be brought before the committee, I would have thought they would have had the courtesy to either send in a written response or else appear in person. I don't take kindly to that. As to the trees, it is, as Jane said, there's no obligation, but unfortunately, when people are anticipating that they may get planning permission, I've seen it so many times in the past, they will clear as much of the site as possible just to give an amenity area to let people see what it would look like. It is not particularly, it's acceptable, but we don't like it. Anyway, there we go.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Building in the countryside, first of all. It's one of our more staunch policies, and I, in the past, in the not so distant past, this term, have supported various applications in Birmingham for a single house that is outside the settlement area, and it got refused. This isn't sour grapes, but if we're going to put a policy forward to refuse a single building, we're now looking at 3. So, you know, on that one, I come down on that we've got to adhere to a policy. Secondly, I do take Madam Chairman's stance on Councillor Hayman not being here or putting in a written submission. I would never do such a thing, and I think that is bad management. Thirdly, I find with the parish council, I know Trunch pretty well. I know it's not in my my ward, but it is a bustling little village. And it's very, very self-contained, but it does have the problem of being quite sparse with major roads supporting in and out of it. So therefore communication, travel is a problem. And I think putting 3 houses in this area, contravening our building the countryside or outside the settlement area is wrong. As it stands at the moment, notwithstanding any other applications, and I also support the fact of the trees, we wait and see what happens, but at the moment I'm against it. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like a little bit of clarity, please, on how we are considering policy SS2 is challenged by paragraph 78 of the National Planning Policy Framework. We time and time again have applications before this committee where we are considering development in the countryside, and we routinely give great weight to policies SS1 and SS2. But we have here an application which, because this development is perceived to be supporting the rural economy of Trunch, we suddenly seem to give great consideration to paragraph 78 over our own local policy. So I would just welcome a little bit of clarity, perhaps from the officer on that. I think that this site is probably more suitable for 2. So it concerns me that we've given an indication that we might consider up to 3 dwellings on, if you compare the site to the bungalow fronting the road to which this property is accessed. 3 units appear to be sending a message that there is, to use the vernacular, some garden grabbing going on here. And I would also ask that the landscape officers, as it were, maximise their power and their design capability in the landscaping plan for the site, if it is permitted, to ensure that we send a message to the developer that the landscape scheme that we expect him to adopt to replace the trees that are removed will be particularly of a high specification in this instance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Officer Owen, do you have a comment?
I would like to comment on the up to 3 dwellings. The description of the development has been changed to give us some flexibility at the detailed stage when we have full details, particularly in relation to the trees and replacement planting. So if outline permission is granted, the council are not restricted to 3 dwellings on this site. At the detailed stage, we could still say 3 is too many. So we have inbuilt in the description of the development some flexibility at the detailed stage. In terms of paragraph 78, I think I'm going to ask Philip to assist me on that one. The The assessment in the report has been based on a similar assessment in 5 other cases of recent developments in recent years, which are in your presentation packs. And the same assessment has been used in Trunch on several previous applications, and it's the similar assessment that's been taken in this case.
Thank you. Chairman, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with members. As all members will be aware, you will understand that our local plan is aged. It was devised at a time prior to the first MPPF. The MPPF, when it arrived, introduced the concept of sustainable development around 3 criteria from which you can judge sustainable development. Those have been considered in all of the reports that you've seen, where proposals are considered to depart from policy SS1 and SS2. I regret to say, members, it is not as straightforward as simply saying this is a development in the open countryside. We need to consider the 3 elements of the MPPF in terms of sustainable development. Now, Chairman, as the member who raised the question knows, as a chairman of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party, we are working very hard to deliver a new local plan. That new local plan is going to be led very much by the updated MPPF from 2019. We are looking in that new local plan to try to bring forward development in smaller settlements. Trunch is one of those smaller settlements. Our sustainability criteria have assessed that through a considerable amount of work and consultation with local communities. And on that basis, a development of this type proposed in the heart of the village of Trunch is considered to have reasonable access to services, it satisfies the economic considerations, and also has connectivity under the MPPF, which would otherwise satisfy the sustainable development criteria. So the officers arrive at a point whereby we appreciate that this is a departure from policy SS2. We only depart after careful consideration. It may be that other forms of development in Trunch are not sustainable. We don't necessarily say that Trunch and development go hand in hand at this stage before the new local plan is actually adopted. I must say that that local plan today carries very limited, if any, weight. So today is an assessment of this site under paragraph 78 of the MPPF and the core sustainability criteria. On that basis, members, our officers find this to be an acceptable, otherwise sustainable location. Regretfully, members, I look at all of you across this chamber as we've talked about SS1 and SS2 and individual plots in the countryside previously. I would say, members, that officers have to carry out that analysis of sustainability, and it will be a matter of some debate for us until our working party get that document moved forward and adopted. I know they're working very hard on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Officer Allison. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, actually, I'm glad Officer Russell came up there because in principle of we know where I've stood with countryside stuff, but actually I think this is acceptable in principle. I think there's some interesting things that have gone on in the debate in terms of trees that have already been removed, which again, we understand the weighting of that. We've also had the previous application where we said about sustainability. And again, I've looked up the, I think it's the design and access statement I have here. And I hope that should we go with the officer's recommendation, it says here the new buildings will be constructed from modern construction materials with insulation values in excess of the basic building regulations to improve the sustainability and local distinctiveness. The use of the locally sourced materials will be encouraged as well to use green technologies to heat the dwellings, such as air source heat pumps or similar. I hope these aren't just words, should we accept the officer's approval, but actually they become a reality. And whilst we have a new plan that doesn't carry any particular weight at the moment, by the time this comes round and our new plan has been sent for Regulation 19 consideration, it will be getting very much closer. And I would hope that what's brought to us or brought through to planning is much nearer, if not in excess of those standards. So I think, I don't know what we can do about ensuring that, but in the principle as laid out by the officer, I'm happy to propose.
Thank you, Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank the officer for a well-reasoned report. And on this occasion, I do accept the fact that the application site I don't accept that it's actually in the countryside. It is surrounded on 3 sides by the buildings. There have been 5 other sites within Trunch that have been recently have passed applications. I don't find it harmful. This is an outline application, the details of which will be discussed if this comes back before committee. So I'm prepared to second the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two real points. I mean, I'm tempted to call myself Councillor Broken Record, to be honest, because I seem to say the same things over and over again. That this particular development, whilst I believe in principle, there's probably nothing wrong with it. I can see there's 2 parking spaces and a garage. Is there any anything in the design for a electrical charging point or any of this type of thing? And my other concern really is it does look like it's rather crammed in. I don't know how the officer feel about that, but to me it does. I mean, reading the report from the parish council, etc., that they seem to think it's a bit crammed in. And I do have concerns, obviously, about the environmental credentials of the building. Okay, they are doing to current building standards, but are they doing any more than that, or are they just plonking 3 houses on a piece of wasteland? That's my view on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinibal. This is an outline application for up to 3 dwellings. It is not fully detailed, so I'm sure that an officer will confirm that means that all the details will be dealt with at a later date in a further application. I think I'm correct on.
Chairman,
that's sorry, Karen. Yes, that's correct. This is an outline. We are only looking at the principle and access at this stage, and those issues will be for review at the detailed stage. And I take on board what the comments that have been made in terms of the indicative layout. But as I said, we are not committed to the layout shown. It is indicative, and we will fully review it when we have at the detail stage if the principle is found to be acceptable.
Thank you. Clarify. That's a holiday.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is about access. You've got a very narrow access onto a very narrow lane, and if you've got one person coming out, one person coming in, that person's going to be reversing. One person's going to be reversing into the main road in quotes, and then you see this occasionally in country villages, and it can be quite dangerous actually. And I'm not sure enough weight has been given to that in this application.
Thank you. Any further comment, Chair?
As you will have seen in the report, the Highways Authority have raised no objections subject to conditions in terms of the proposed access. So we haven't been, as of officer level, we haven't been able to find that we could substantiate a reason for refusal on highway safety grounds because the Highways Authority do not object subject to conditions.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
Just to clarify, it does seem from the plan that the access is 3.7 metres wide, so that's wide enough to get to 2 cars past, isn't it?
Okay, we've had a very robust debate on this one. We have a proposer, Councillor Doy, and a seconder, Councillor Kershaw. So we can move to the proposal, which is to approve this outline application subject to conditions as set out on your papers. Hold a vote, please, on that.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll read people's names out in alphabetical order. Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett.
For.
Councillor Grove-Jones.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
For.
Councillor Holliday.
For.
Councillor Kershaw.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
For.
Councillor Pearce.
Against.
Councillor Toy.
For.
And again, Councillor Withington and Councillor Yassimi are not present. That's 9 in favour and 2 against. Thank you.
Thank you. The application set out is approved.
Chairman, I'm just in discussion with you and the then Chairman in the briefing session. We recognise that there may be issues relating to the significance of achieving 3 dwellings on this site. It may be wise if we can include an informative on our decision notice to suggest that the applicant engage in pre-application discussions prior to the submission of any reserve matters. We all have long and quite painful experience of people going backwards and forwards with tightish plots and going backwards and forwards with many applications. I think pre-application engagement would help everybody at this stage. Can't insist on it, but we can certainly include it as an informative.
Thank you. Okay, item 8, appeals. Sir Alice.
Thank you, Chairman. We reported appeals, I think, a little more than 2 weeks ago, so I'm going to be quite brief, if you don't mind, and I'll be happy to be open to questions. You can see we have no new appeals since we last reported to you. Good news for everybody, I think. We then have inquiries and hearings in hand, and you can see we have a number of items. I spoke latterly on Arcadia Cly at our last meeting, and I updated on that. I have also reviewed the Planning Inspectorate's website for the Holt application, what we know as the Gladman application. And I can tell you, Chairman, this morning, we still don't have a decision. I suggest that we write to the Planning Inspectorate and we inquire as to exactly what timetable under which this application will be delivered. I know both the chairman of the policy working party, yourself, and the chairman of this committee and our portfolio holder all have concerns about this delay and the potential impact that that has in terms of taking our local plan forward. It's very important that this decision is made by the Planning Inspectorate. On that basis, I don't really have anything further to add on inquiries and hearing appeals. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to help directly. Thank you, Chairman. I'll take that as no questions. Written representation appeals in hand. Again, you can see under item C on page 22 of the report, we have a number of written representations in hand. Again, I'll be happy to take any questions that members have on those cases.
Just one from myself. The High Kelling, I understand that's expected shortly.
Yes, Chairman. We attended the planning inspector's site visit 2 weeks ago. The inspector told us that he'd be reporting in 5 weeks. So 3 weeks is the deadline. I expect that we should receive a response at that stage. Obviously a very important enforcement case. Whatever those outcomes, I will be reporting to you. If the inspector dismisses the appellant's case, then I will bring back to you in this special circumstance recommendations for enforcement of that notice. Thank you, Chairman. Moving on then, we have appeal decisions and summaries. The first one I need to report to you is at Edgefield, where a written representations appeal has been allowed. This was an appeal against non-determination. The applicant was unwilling to negotiate further with officers and the council and took their case to the planning inspectorate. Officers responded in their written representation statement and explained why the scheme as it stood at that point was unacceptable. I regret to say, members, that the planning inspectorate were not convinced, and they considered that the proposals were otherwise in keeping principally with policy EN4 design in terms of our core strategy. Disappointing outcome, members, but it is one of those issues that we must bear in mind with applications that we can only negotiate so far, and applicants do have the right to appeal against non-determination. Moving on, members, we have the case at Itteringham, which was subject to a public inquiry. I'm very pleased to report that this long-running enforcement case was a situation where the appeal has been dismissed and the occupancy of the annex as a standalone dwelling will need to cease within 6 months of the date of the inspector's decision. We will work with the appellant to ensure that their housing needs are met, but I must say that the work put in that case by the enforcement team was exemplary, and particularly, Chairman, I should praise Kevin Peacock, who went beyond the call of duty and spent many hours and much of his own time preparing that case. It was his first public inquiry, and I'm delighted to tell you, members, that that robust case was upheld. Thank you. There are no further comments or questions, and we move to court cases at the bottom of page 23, and I can tell you that there are no further court cases to report, Chairman. And on that basis, I close the appeals report.
Thank you. Things are running reasonably smoothly there. Okay, we have no urgent business. We have no,
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, through you, can I just ask the question whether the decisions in those two last appeal cases, one being dismissed, one being allowed, will be uploaded onto the public access website?
Chairman, all appeal decisions are uploaded onto the public access site. We've had some comments about accessibility of those decisions. They are all uploaded under the appeals tab. So if anyone is reporting difficulties for yourselves or members of your community accessing the appeal decisions, please come back to me. We'll review with you how we can best make those accessible under public access, but they should all be available for you.
Thank you.
okay, turn agenda as stated, we have no urgent business. We have no private business, therefore we need to exclude the public and press. And therefore, meeting closed at, what are we? 47. 47. Thank you all.